All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the show. First thing I want to say is I'm sorry if you tuned in last week and I wasn't there. I was in St. Louis doing commentary. Originally, it was just this GM in residence thing, and I thought I was going to be able to do a show from there. But then I got hooked into a commentary gig from the tournament, the summer classic that was going on there, and that's why I had to delay it. And I'm actually going back to St. Louis next week to do commentary for the Junior Open and the Senior Open. But that won't interfere. That'll interfere with my regular show, which I've really flown it off because of all this trips and stuff. But I will definitely at least intend to be on track for the end of this month. So it would be the last Wednesday of this month. I'll be back for that. Vishnu's here. I've got a great story for Vishnu later, but I will save that. Let me begin just with my normal spiel here. My sense is that going over your games is the most important and difficult way to improve, and this show is meant as a vehicle for people to do that, for me to help them do that and to encourage them to do that. And one of the great things I guess I'm most proud about the show is just that when I look at the notes that people write in for their games, they're much better, much higher quality than than the notes that when I first started, right? And that was my own experience as a player. That when I first started writing notes, they were pretty minor. They weren't too deep, and because it was a difficult process to try to identify what the questions were to be asking. And so part of this show is the hope that I'll help you guys answer some questions. DZ, I got a game of yours. We're going to look at your game a little later as well. All right, so let's start. It's always difficult to choose how I should start, but I chose Door's game mostly because I thought it was really impressive that he used a lot of the concepts that we had talked about on the show before. So let's take a look here. Queen d8, and Queen a5 makes the most sense to me because I'm a tempo fiend and it hurts me to not develop. But what Dora's doing is following a simple plan that Magnus played against Fabian won, and we're going to talk a little bit about the resulting situation here. So, Bishop g4, as in Fabi's game, c6, and this is the first situation I think it's really interesting to talk about. The move c6, you can think of it as a developing move insofar as it's telling the knight on c3 that it's not a good piece. And the long-term idea is very simple, and I like what Dor does here, is that we're going to try to put our pawns on light squares, us being black. We're going to put our pawns on light squares, and that's going to shut in the bishop that we're most afraid of, namely this unopposed light square bishop right here. And our counterplay, if you want to call it that, is going to be a long-term attack against this pawn, and that's definitely going to be a big feature of this game. And I think if you play this opening, you can, even though it looks kind of passive, you definitely have a game plan which starts now and goes into the ending, which Dora is going to put into effect. Now on White's side, one of the things that's difficult for White to understand is he has to understand he has to fix the knight, and he also has to understand that, yeah, the bishop wants freedom, i.e. it wants some kind of penetrating line into the black camp, and that's like a long-term aim of his. But then the most difficult thing for White to, maybe not to understand, but to achieve is we are going to have a small space advantage, and we're going to need to use that space advantage to constrict the black pieces. And one thing I've said many times on the show is that the space advantage is the hardest thing to actually execute, because you really have to be looking at all of black's pieces and just trying to take away squares from them. That's what the space advantage is about. And, it's funny, I had a chance to hang out a little bit in St. Louis with Gawain Jones, Super GM from England, and he said an interesting statement. I guess hadn't put in my own words before, that now modern play is more and more moving towards playing for space. And we had this great thing where on the final night we played two-handed chess. So one player makes a move and then the other makes a move. And I was playing with Gawain, and of course I played the French. And for a blitz opening, he said we won. We crushed everybody with it. And for a blitz opening, it's perfect. And he said it like, you just defending against the threats, and it's white who has to really think about how he's going to use the space advantage. And that's similar here too. A good question for yourself here. There's these books which have like positional chess and what should you do. Is what should white play here? And I don't think I would have ever thought of Fabi's move, but it's a great move here. I think I covered it on some other show, maybe on this one. And it was knight e2. Beautiful move, because first of all, the knight is dominated on c3 by the pawn on c6. So the knight wants to move anyway. Secondly, the bishop to e3, which is what happens in the game, is a fine enough move, and maybe white's even still a little bit better here. But the bishop will come under attack there later, whether it's by knight d5, and it's not clear that the bishop actually wants to go there. It's just going there to protect the pawn. And with Fabi's move, what he did was he played knight e2, and then he played for space with g4. Beautiful. Really nice play. And he lost that game because he was playing Magnus. and because it's hard to play for a space advantage, especially with someone like Magnus. Actually, if you want an example of that, the game from today, Mamedyarov against Magnus, was a perfect example where Mamedyarov definitely had a nice space advantage going into the game, and then lost. Lost brutally. Okay. Anyways, long speech. Let me get into this. Thank you, Gina. The Tempo Fiend is back. So e6. a3 is definitely a weird move. And let's get inside white's head for a second here. I'm going to claim that the reason white played a3 is to prevent castles long. And or excuse me, let me say that again. The reason white played a3 was to stop bishop b4. And the reason this is misguided is that knight on c3 is white's worst piece. At the very least, it owes black a tempo because the pawn on c6 is dominating it. So bishop b4, even if we gave him 2 tempi to trade it off, is not something that black should even be interested in the slightest. That bishop on the dark squares is really the mortar. If you think of a bricks and mortar situation, the pawns are the bricks and the bishop is the mortar, the glue that's going to hold all those dark squares in between the pawns on light squares together. So really we're not that interested in trading that bishop, especially for the knight. So it's a clear loss of time. I'll say it again. You guys are probably terrible. Hear me say this all the time. But the big thing at this level, between, say, 1600 and 2300, is the lack of appreciation of time. Okay, bishop d3. I'm going to turn my sound, my own like little sound off here so I don't have to hear it going clink, clink, clink all the time. All right. So, this all happens, and what you can feel here is that white isn't really playing with a plan, right? And there's many different moves that black can do here. But I like what Dor did. Is really fulfilling the idea of a long-term plan, namely g6. By the way, I'm going to make just a plea for white, is that if you're not a genius like Fabi, and the other way to play for this position is just in a position like this to play knight e4. You're going to trade the knights and then play slowly with c3. It is true that then your a3 move made no sense, but it didn't make any sense anyway. But in general, this would be the plan in similar positions where we're going to aim to have our unopposed light square bishop and play for a little bit of space, and not, by the way, to commit to c4. And we're going to talk about this c4 decision in a little bit. Now in this position, another totally fine move that black could play here is b5. But let's look what he did, because I like the fact that it is following through on the long-term strategy, which is we want to build a wall that's going to meet that light square bishop. It's a very potent long-term idea. And what it's going to do now is ask white if he wants to play c4. And I believe he did this. So let's talk about it. The move c4, of course, can be, in some positions, a very valuable space gain for white. In particular, if it can make one or more of our knights look bad. And maybe here it is a little inconvenient. But what I want you to see is that it's a very committal move and essentially makes this pawn here on d4 an isolated pawn. So if you play the Scandinavian, you'll get a lot of positions like this where your goal is really to trade off that d5 knight. In fact, to trade off all the minors and then to pound the pawn on d4. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. And we'll say that the danger of the black position here is that the knight on b6 is poor, right? That knight needs to be fixed. And here's an interesting thing. I'm always tempted to play this bishop h6 move too, but, you know, like Dor says, he's like, you know what, my rook kind of wants to be on e8 anyway. And with bishop h6, if I need to or want to, things like bishop g5 will become available, where I want to trade pieces, even if that piece is maybe, you know, one of my better pieces. Okay, queen g3 to stop bishop g5. You can feel, I'm sure, that white doesn't really have a plan. And I feel for him, because I've been in this, we've all been in some situation like this where our pieces are just kind of around the position, but we don't know what they're doing. And one of the reasons I selected this game I thought so great is, you know, we can argue with some of Dor's moves, but in general, he's following a great long-term strategy. And, you know, that's really a beautiful thing. One of the things he complains about, actually, is that he has trouble in time pressure, and that's how this game, this beautiful game, is ultimately going to be ruined, is because of time pressure. But and he asks for advice, and I would say, though, that if you have a plan, that's the best kind of time pressure avoidance you can ever get, because it's when you don't have a plan, you know, that you'll stew on the position. If you do have a plan, you know, usually you'll have a sense of where the pieces belong. So knight f6. Again, we need to fix this guy over here on b6. Rook a d1. By the way, I think rook a d1 instead of bishop h6 probably would have been called for. Knight h5. Okay. We're going to dance around a little bit. Good. Always repeat. Knight g3. And so it's a funny thing for white, right? Where he doesn't understand that the trading is going to help black. And it might not be evident to people just watching it, but the overall trend that we're going to see is the minor pieces are going to kind of fall off the board because white is just moving around, and we're going to pick them off. And the more they come off, the more that d4 pawn is going to become a target. And why? Because the pawns in the center, these guys, their value is to gain space and to shut the pieces down. For example, the pawn on d4, we can say that it's dominating the knight on d7. But once you start trading stuff off, well, now it's going to be kind of easy, right? When I say easy, I just mean that it's going to be easier for us to put the rooks on the d file and just wail on the b6 pawn. Now, this was an interesting moment because in general, we want to take on g3, but I think black is rightly a little bit afraid of fg, and I wouldn't want to see it either. So we're queen b6, nice. Simple chess, right? Simple chess. At some point here, white should really think about knight e4, or even going back to knight e2. Knight g3, beautiful. So we waited until the rook went away, and now if fg, we could have played queen takes d4 check. Queen a5. Notice black, it was a clever move. We're putting a little pressure on, and it was really a dirty trick because on bishop g5, knight h5 will win a piece. And it allows this, very nice. Queen c3, and here's an interesting moment. I think what black did is fine, but what I would just say in terms of plans is that rook d7 followed by rook d8 appeals to me quite a lot. By the way, people who already have heard me talk before will probably become annoyed with me. But the idea is that this is the incinerator, the Nimzovitchian idea, is that we're going to stop the pawn, as for example with an isolated pawn, it's the same thing, and then we're going to attack it. Now, I want to read some of the comments because I've been inconsiderate talking all the time and not reading stuff. Yeah. Good. DZ's playing the queen a5 stuff. Yeah, and they do know it by heart. Yeah, you get a feel for it. Right. And DZ says another way to avoid it is to transpose to French advance. I don't think you can. I don't think you can transpose the French advance. Maybe I think what you're saying there is that on d5 you can play e5. But this isn't going to work because my bishop here is out. So this is a terrible deal here for white. Okay, let's go back to the game. So, in this position after queen c3, as I said, I like rook d7, rook d8. Black played b5, and the intentions at least are good. There's a lot to think about here. White takes. An idea just crossed my mind. Could white do this? I kind of think he can't. He can't, but let's just check it out. So snip, snip, and obviously knight takes is no bueno because of this. Maybe you just do snip. Yeah, okay, that's a thought. And because this is annoying, we're not really doing anything as white. All right. Now, the thing that scared me, not scared is too strong of a word, but, well, let's just first say what black is doing. Black is going to knock this pawn out and gain this square for the knight. What scares me a little bit about it, though, is that you're giving white some entrance on the queen side. Whereas after rook d7, I'm not sure he actually had any play. Okay, so takes, queen a6. Good. And, I think if I was white here, I might be looking for something a little bit more. In general, remember, he wants to open this thing as soon as possible. And so some move where he can get that going is what he's looking for. But all right, I don't see it anyways. So here's a move I want to be critical of with rook d5. Let's think about what you should think about it like this. This bishop is the guy we have to tame, right? If that guy's blocked in, we're doing great. If he gets some juice, well, then we might have some trouble. And this move, rook d5, feels misguided for two reasons. One, you are allowing bishop b3, and two, you're starting a big adventure now with rook over. So the simple move, I think let's call it the Scandinavian move, is to play rook d7, rook over, and then, let's get the party going, right? So rook d5, maybe this is fine for you, but it's freaking me out because now the rook can't come back. And the rook is going on some kind of adventure. And maybe this is the key to where the time pressure happened, because now things get weird, and when things get weird, then you're going to have to spend some time. If you just played rook d7, rook d8, it feels to me like it would have been much simpler to play, whereas this is quite complicated. Vishnu says he's lost some cash by playing that kind of move. That's right. I like to compare these rook lifts to a situation in tennis where you're like charging the net. It's a very volatile situation, and you should really have at least a target when you go up there. If you got no ball to hit, it's no good. Okay, so we're at least continuing the trades. And this move is poor, and the move that screams out to be played now is some kind of d5. Yeah. And that's the move that you'd look at even before you calculated anything, right? Because your bishop, it's the whole Nimzovitchian thing where you say, well, my pawn has a lust to expand, right? And you're cutting this rook off. You make ed, well, you could play ed, and then something like this happens. And I just want you to see this bishop is now a worthy beast, and this rook, I don't know what it's doing. So something like that is precisely the kind of way in which white can turn this game around. Okay. Rook d3, knight d5, very good move. And here we're, just within that one move, letting black achieve knight d5, white just created a whole mess of trouble for himself. Especially because we'd like to play g3, but then the rook actually does something with rook takes h3. Let me stress something. If I'm white here, I'm probably going to want to at least think deeply about g3, because otherwise, this position that he lets happen, this is now one of the reasons I chose this game, because I felt like this is such a paradigmatic position of what black is hoping for when he plays the Scandinavian. Okay, queen e4, rook d8, f4. Now f4 is going to stop e5, but here's an important point that I want you guys to think about. In game, I think it's game 2 with St. Nick, we're going to look at a very similar structure that happens. And what I want you to see with f4 is f4, he's got his mind on the pawns, right? But the bigger issue problem, by the way, he will lose the pawn. You're going to lose the pawn no matter what, I think. But the bigger issue problem that you're creating is you are creating a weak king. So already black should say to himself, well, right, maybe now I'll get a pawn and I'll have the better king, right? Okay, f6. Now, by the way, there's more than one way to do this. Like rook c8 to c4, for example, looks very strong. But f6, okay. Maybe this is slightly inaccurate, but in my experience, you really can't stop this bestial thing of happening with the D file and then a pin on e5. Okay, so let's stop for a moment and let's think about what's the next phase of this game. Remember, when you're playing these positions, say to yourself that what you're looking for is two weaknesses, right? And that's just your way of saying whether you're winning or not. You're winning when you have two weaknesses. So let's talk about what the weaknesses might be. The pawn, of course, on d4 is an amazing pawn. But one thing I want you guys to see, and I think we're going to see this in game 2 as well, is that the true value of the pawn in this kind of position is that we can make white go passive. And the second we can make him go passive, then we will be able to then attack the king. And that's what I'm going to call weakness number 2. So a big mistake that I think black was probably still winning, but the mistake I didn't like was black had the intuition here of trading queens. And I don't think that should be his intuition. So let's look. D3, rook f6. Now he gets a little scared, right? And plays queen e5. And the question is really like, what is white threatening? And I don't think he's threatening anything, honestly. I think, for example, I don't know, queen c7 or queen c5 look good, followed by d2. And then there's nothing. There's not a lot going on. Actually, maybe we need to defend against this. Maybe I'm speaking a little too soon. Let's play queen d7. I just want to play d2 next. And on rook f7, I'm going to snip the thing off. And d2 will come soon. Okay, so let's look at what happened. Queen e5, and white tries to make things complicated with queen b4. So obviously he's doing some tricks, right, with rook f8. And it's a little scary, but notice that with queen e5, we've really centralized our queen in a kind of amazing way. So black trades everything off, and maybe he still is winning, and in this case, that makes it the best practical move. But of course, I'm looking for some way to avoid it, if I could. And maybe it's not so easy. Actually, I'm not in favor of this. I'm not in favor of this, but you could do this kind of thing. Right. And, I do. This is the kind of thing, actually, I know that it's winning for black, but I've always been uncomfortable with it, and I think others are too, because it feels like the rooks get discoordinated. Who knows what's actually going to happen? So I'm against that one. What is the easy way? Maybe there isn't. Of course, let's look at d2. The problem there is check to the miserable king. King g7. Check to the miserable king. King h8. Check to the miserable king. Queen h5. Check to the miserable king. Queen g5. And I'm nervous here. This might still be winning. It probably is, but you can tell. This is the kind of thing that should make you a little bit nervous, because if you've miscalculated anything, it's the end. The good news for us is rook takes, king takes, queen takes. We do not have to immediately take the queen, but of course throw in d1. Let's review that variation, because I think even though black's move in the game is very good practically, this is what we want to do. So let's just try it out again. d2, check. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. If he goes passive, we're just saying he's winning, and in fact, of course, the rook on f6 is just hanging if he plays rook d1. So here, king g7. And actually, let's just double check here. So snip, rook d1. This is the kind of thing, right, that I was interested in, and getting like this kind of position. Queen e2, queen b3, queen e1. Okay. But of course, the scary thing is that dirty check on f8. King g7. Check. These are the only checks I see. That's the only check I see. Again, we have to make sure we don't have any kind of terrible thing. Okay, I think that's working. In any case, that would be hard to see, and if you were in time pressure, that would really be a bummer too. Let's look at what black did. Queen d4. Now, let's just say the reason why this is closer to drawing, though probably not drawing, is that white can dream about If white gets his king, let's say, in front of the pawn, then there are real drawing chances. And I think that's why he should play king f2 immediately here, right? Yeah, that will really force d2, because otherwise I'm going to get in there. And this position, well, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. So, rook d1 happened, and it's passive. Rook e8, and then good move by white. So, already here, even this position too, it's a little bit hard. But notice white did not activate the king here. Rook f3, I'm going to guess there's a better move than that. The problem with this is kind of interesting, is that it's going to create a situation now where the white pawns are split. And this is going to be a big deal, especially for the king and pawn ending. Notice the rook on d2 is terrible. A simple rule of thumb, the order of ascendancy for the power of the rook is the rook behind the pawn is best. Next best is rook on the side, and then the worst, of course, is being in front of the pawn, passive like that. So I think this is now winning, and I critique rook f3 a little bit. I would have played king e5, but I think this is still okay. The guy takes. He probably shouldn't. And here, I want you guys to put yourself in Dora's situation here. I feel like he didn't have a sense that this was necessarily winning, whereas I think you have a little bit of experience in the king and pawn endgame. You're just going to say to yourself, "Oh, right, this is totally done." And one of the key things to see whether you're in time pressure or not. And by the way, these days chess, you have very little time left for the endgame. So when you do play the endgame, you want to have just an intuitive sense of what's correct. Is that the big thing I want Dora to take away from a lot of the moves he made is even if you don't have the ability to calculate everything out, what you don't want to do is waste pawn moves, because pawn moves are tempos that you can give back to your opponent. What I mean by give back is you can put him in Zugzwang, right? So the simple way to play this position here is to play king e5. You're still, I think you're still winning after a5, but the point is you might want to use this pawn to give a tempo later, like maybe just making a little move like this. So for example, king e5, king e3, g5, and we're going to zug him out of this square. Now notice, let's say, I don't know, b3. You could probably play ace. You could play either king f5 or a6. Well, let's play king f5. I don't think king d4 is going to work, so we go like this. And now we play h6. And we're going to want to, get him out of there. Make him move. And he's going to run out of moves. Right? And I could also play a6. So that's the general theme, especially in time pressure, that you want to be aware of, is that you'll see what you did here is you gave him a lot of time. First with that move, g5 was okay, and now you do need to calculate it out here. When you play b4, you're probably still winning, right? But it's getting a little hot here, and the move here you have to do is king e5. Have to do. And I think you're still winning here. For example, king e2, king f4, king f2, h6 is our move, and I guess he's going to have to go this way, right? And we've got more than one thing, but now, for example, I think we could plan to put him in Zugzwang with h5, h4. He can't go this way because we'll come in. He goes this way, and we will separate this man from his pawns. Okay, king e3. Let's show the game. And here, draw agreed, and Dora writes, because I couldn't see how to break through. Now, it is technically a draw, but watch, your opponent still has to be clever here. He has to play king e1. That's the only thing I can see with the long opposition, right? Basically, a simple way to understand this is he needs to be able to meet that move with that move, and he has to be able to meet that move with that move. Well, you can massage him at least a little bit, right? You can massage him a little bit and go back and see what he does. It's not that simple. For example, is he in trouble if he allows that? Well, kind of interesting, isn't it? I think he's still okay because here unfortunately, we can't do this. But if you played King D2, we were winning with King D4. If you played King F2, we're winning with King F4. Okay, so that said, I thought there was some important lessons there, and I really appreciate and admire Dora for taking the simple concept of that opening and applying it. And for me, it's instructive in the sense that when you study openings, it's so normal, let's say, to turn on the computer and to have the computer tell you all kinds of strange things. And sometimes the computer really will tell you very interesting moves. But the thing about it is that in a practical game, what you want more than anything is kind of a structure or position that you understand and kind of have a sense of where the pieces go. That's when you become truly dangerous as a chess opponent. Yes, it's possible to get some computery variation and you'll win it once in a while, but you're really dangerous if you have an opening like this, where you have a strong sense of where the pieces go, right? And if you play it a couple times, right, you'll get an even better sense of it. So, I really enjoyed the game. And now we're going to see the next game I thought was similar. Uh-oh, I made a blunder here. I have to go steal this. I have to go steal the PGN because it somehow disappeared, but I can do that. I lost your PGN, St. Nick, but I can get it. All right. So there we go. Go back. Oh, that one. Boom. PGN. Technology is beautiful. All right. This game I felt like had some similarities to the last, and let's flip it because St. Nick was black. So first of all, let me critique this as a French player, and I know exactly what Black is thinking here. Black is thinking to himself, oh, I am a genius for trading off my bad bishop, right? And the thing I want you to see about it, though, is although it's true that you are going to trade your bad bishop, you are investing, first of all, you had to invest the tempo with b6. And then we have to really say that the knight is bad on a6. So, yes, you traded off the bishop, but you gave White a tempo, and you made your knight bad. So this kind of variation has been tempting French players since the beginning of the French, and it's usually a bad idea. Okay, castles, knight c7, f4, f5. And here's an interesting, I thought this was, very typical, we could say, that one of the reasons people don't appreciate bad pieces at the level even below 2300 is a lot of times their opponents have freed their bad pieces. And that's exactly what happens here. So let's just say the knight on c7 is poor here. And in the next couple moves, White is just going to simply free it. And it's hard when you look at this position. You're like, really? The knight's going to be freed? Hard to imagine, right? So here we go. Snip, snip, f5. And right, you're doing it way too soon. Knight f3, of course, is the move you should be doing. I think White's got a great position, right? He's going to land on e5, and it's going to be very pleasant. It's a beautiful French position where this guy really, he needs a job. That guy needs a job. Okay, so instead, Let's see here. White played f5, bishop d6, and then this move too I'm critical of, takes. So now think about it. That knight, which was terrible, is now freed. So let me get on my hobby horse just for a second. The reason why oftentimes players don't appreciate bad pieces until much later in their chess career is because the people they were playing fixed them for them, right? Like here, white fixed the knight on c7. So now it feels like we're a genius, right, for doing this whole thing of knight a6, c7, e6. c4, another very strange move. Analogy I like is you don't want to open the doors to your house if everything's messy inside, right? It's just not the time to invite guests over, and that's what white does here with c4. I think there's a number of good moves here for black. He castles, and I think I liked cd better than dc, but let's just go through this for a second. And as you'll see, the similarity to the last position is, of course, that we've got that beautiful passed d pawn, and also, I think, the better king. a3, a5, knight e5. This is like a tricky looking move, but the main thing I want you to see as the black player here is your concern should be to say, what I want to do is I want to prevent the knight from coming to d3. Because it's true what they say, that the knight is a great defender, a great blockader. And once that knight gets there, it's going to be very difficult. So, and also, let's just add that the queen on d3 is not a great piece. So, white plays queen d5, and in spirit it's correct. The next move, though, is probably not, and that is on rook f5. Black played queen e4. So rook f5 is a tactical attempt, right, to mess with black here. How good is it? I don't know. It is a little scary. We are going to say that. On queen e4, though, notice what we're doing. We're going to help white get the knight to d3. So that's kind of where the beginning of our problems start here. Let's look at this again. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't really see any big threats for white. We might want to be concerned about bishop f6, rook f6, knight f7. We don't want to fall for that. But other than that, I don't think he's actually doing that much to us. Still, it's fair to ask, like, well, what should we do? And, it's not that easy, but think about it. This queen is poor, and that's the one we kind of want to get out of there. Now, you could say to me, well, Cry, what do you want me to actually do? Fair question. That's a totally fair question. It's just that I'm not sure he's doing anything that dramatic to us yet. Your queen d5 on us is a very natural move. So that that we miss or misevaluate rook f5 is natural enough. Rook c7 looks fairly, normal-ish. And, yeah, that's rook c7. I don't think he's doing all that much. You might even be able to get away with a4. Okay, queen d5, queen e4, bishop f6, queen d3, knight d3, snip. And I'm going to say here that white should now probably be okay, because the knight is so strong, and you're going to be able to now push b4. And kind of actually similar to last game, I didn't intend that, was the pawns are now split on the king's side. And in particular with the knight, that might help some kind of counterplay for white. In a practical game, white could even dream about winning this position. Rook c1, good move. Rook c7, rook c4, rook d7. And now here's White's moment of truth. He goes ahead and says, I just want to end this thing, and plays knight c5. But he could have dreamt of more, because black isn't doing all that much yet. King f2 in particular comes to mind when black is simply sitting on the position, right? As it was, white, this is very normal. You just want to bail out, right? And now we're getting a draw after this. I don't know why we quite give a draw yet, right? Now, by the way, white should, I feel like, made it easier on itself. Instead of b4, play rook d1, and then things come off. As it was, is it a draw here? Yes, but we can make him sweat a little bit. We can make him sweat. Okay, so let's move on to the next game. This is James, and he's playing, I believe, his friend Lisa. And let's switch it because he's black. All right, so this, I feel like I saw a similar idea in a game I was recently following in St. Louis with this a4 move. b5 is a surprising move to me. Yeah, I would say, h6 makes the most sense, just to ask white the question of what he wants to do with his bishop. This, though, I don't get, because why would we help white out like this, right? And then give him our bishop. Okay, so let's pause here for a second and say that we are in trouble as black because of this amazing unopposed dark square bishop on g5. We're going to actually see later when we talk about Vishnu's game, we're going to talk about this kind of structure with the bishop on g5. I feel like that's a little bit insane to take on d4. You need to take care of this queen on a3. This is a real pain, and as you'll find as we'll see in the game, the major problem is not just the king, but the fact that this rook isn't playing. So a move that immediately comes to mind would be queen b4. Even if you lost a pawn in that situation, I think you would still have practical chances of surviving. Here you win a pawn, and I don't understand bishop d2, by the way. I think she should just play e3, and maybe I'm missing something here, but yeah, this is great. This is beautiful. This is kind of a dream, and maybe we'll talk a little bit. Just bear in mind this dark square bishop, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. Bishop d2, it's not terrible, but why would we do this to... our bishop was beautiful on g5. It doesn't need to be more beautiful by sacrificing some tempi here. f3, okay, e4. And let's give props to your friend, Lisa, here. With f3, e4, she has completely dominated your knight on f6 and your bishop on b7. So beautiful play. And now we go into this endgame. But look what she does. Very nice. Very nice. I should point out, as you did in your notes, that castles is not possible because of bishop b4. And I want you to see, too, that one of the biggest griefs in this position for you is that your knight on f6 and bishop on b7 are totally dominated. So bishop b4, I would say white's winning, something like that. Knight d7. Good. Let me just give a shout out, too, to rook c4. I would say in general, white wants to trade off the black rook because it's basically the one piece of black's that's working, right? Or one of the pieces that's working. Okay, and I think that's just totally lost here. King d7, check. King c6, bishop c3, king d6. Now we're just going to talk about practical chances here because it is definitely lost. I don't like what she did here. She played f4, and to me, the main thing in a position like this would be to avoid counterplay. So there's several things you could do to make life simple. You could play king f2 is the obvious one, but even a move like bishop e5 and rook f7 is just completely winning. F4 is making some weaknesses. So knight d3, rook f7, and here a move that I want you to give yourself 30 lashes for, James. 30 lashes. Of course you're probably lost here, right? We're not going to debate that. But at the moment you have little glints of hope in your eye that maybe you can create a little bit of counterplay. And if you play passively, like rook g8, there's just no chance at all. So when you're playing a game like this and you're lost, just play rook a8. Are you probably lost? Yes. But at least, you're doing something, right? On the other positions, it didn't feel like you were doing anything. Okay, so let's go back and just finish this game up. Rook g8, f5. I didn't understand f5 either, but okay. Life is easy. Right, and Lisa finishes this up very nicely now. Okay, good. Let's move on to the next game. Now, when you submit your game, put your name. Give me your name, because this is Muskathund. This is Muskathund. He probably has a real name. But all right, Muskathund is playing white here. By the way, I kind of started off in a rough way to say that these first several games are about the end game. That's how I organized anyway, how this went. So Muskathund correctly says that this has got to be pretty terrible for black. And now bishop e3, and it's kind of an interesting question. It's like, it's clearly terrible, and my question would be like, how terrible is it? And I don't think it's over yet, but it will soon be over, given what black does. Two options. You could, maybe they're interchangeable as well. You can start with b6, or you can castle. And on castle, I don't really think you want to worry about e5. Two reasons, really. One, there's this rerouting that makes a lot of sense, and maybe you want to do that anyway. And also, this knight f5 would then be available. So right, after castles, I like white, but it's still, there's still much of a game to be played. So in the game, black played c6, simple chess, and my intuition here is that black should be lost. Okay, so castles, good. Now what black does, we have to admire what black does here. Like in the last game, black is in deep trouble. But notice that what black does here is he plays for activity. And when you're getting raged upon, that's what you really want. And one thing about this position is that black has the opposite color bishops. And so that will at least create a situation where the extra pawn or pawns might mean less and initiative mean more than they usually do, right? Pawns always mean something, but they'll mean less in a bishops of opposite color situation where the initiative can count for more. So white plays a very clever move here, knight a7, and probably we're winning, and this move was pushing our luck a little bit. Now, maybe we're winning anyway, but look what black does. Queen b8, rook d1, and all of a sudden, it's like it's maybe not so simple. And I had some other thoughts for black, but let's just look at what happens here. Rook b2, rook here, snip, snip. And definitely now white is actually easily winning because of the simple plan of playing a4 next. let me go back actually for a second. I thought when we were looking at this that I thought I had at least a thought for black here. So let's pretend that queen b8 is correct. That looks correct too. And can I do knight c8 or something? I think I like knight c8 better. So imagine knight takes, rook takes, and I've got this kind of business. And let's say something like c3. I think we can start doing tricks like this. And you can feel a little bit here how the pawns don't mean that much, right? Because if I start getting the initiative on the light squares, it really is going to be a hassle. Right. So that's a good lesson, I think, for black. When you're defending, the opposite color bishop thing will work in your favor, not just because later there's a technical ending if everything comes off, that you'll be able to defend the pawn and the bishop ending. And maybe I should just mention why. Because since you control the light squares, he can't push his pawns through those light squares, so they'll be stopped. And here, you can feel like, oh, right, the initiative is so important because, you know, if black starts nailing his queen on e4 or something, there's going to be drama. And, of course, this rook b8 is a threat, too. Okay, so here we go. Knight c6. This is totally winning. And here, this was actually an exclam move, king f2. And black thinks he's tricking white with bishop d3, but in fact, he's tricking himself. Now, 100 lashes. 100 lashes, Muscarud. Of course you're winning this thing. Of course you're winning this thing. Yeah. Let's talk briefly about this. Why? Yeah, totally winning. And I just want to say, DZ says, white has so many pawns. Yeah, I think he should get more, too, and play rook e8 followed by knight f7. Simple, right? There's not a lot of controversy there. One thing maybe is useful, even though I'm sure this is heartbreaking, to go over and see that you didn't win this game. But what I want you to see is that the rook and the knight are a very potent attacking combination, especially when it comes to, let's call them local weaknesses, like the pawn on f7 and all those squares. And the simple reason is a knight and rook, in contrast to a bishop and a rook, can get both colors. So the knight can really dance. And that's why in a position like this, imagine even if black had a bishop, right? Let's put a bishop somewhere. It's still going to be a lot of grief, probably lost. Imagine if there's a bishop on g7. I'm going to say that's a lost position as well. So h3 didn't make sense, but you're still, of course, winning this thing. How does it fall apart? Let's look. Oh, it didn't fall apart. He finally resigned. Sorry, sorry. It just got a little messy. I got so frustrated. But yeah, of course, it would be hard. It'd be hard to not win. Okay. So let's now go to Marty, the famous Marty in San Francisco. I think all of his games are played at the Mechanics Institute. If you have a chance, one of the greatest chess clubs in America, the oldest running chess club in America. And we're going to get this position here. D4, let's say, is a more normal move. But, right, as I think Marty noted, many GMs have played this position. And black should be, even though it looks totally boring, black should be a little nervous because white does have a little bit of development advantage. Now, this is a kind of interesting, well, for me it's interesting. I think most people find this deadly boring. But a move like knight f3, I think, does give white some hope for an advantage here in the ending. Just because we're up a little time. And notice, so white gave a full tempo there with knight f3. All right, e4, knight b4. And here's the move I want us to think about here. You played knight c2, And I think this is a really critical kind of mistake that we can see people making, where when you play knight c2, you are dreaming of talking to that a3 pawn. But consider for a moment the domination that I think you would have after knight d3. It's not over or anything, and maybe in fact you were worried about bishop d4. But here, knight c5, and again, you're going to have this unopposed bishop, and to me, I don't know, that looks strong. Are you winning? Well, no, probably not winning, but you have a very nice position. So this is a common thing where people see the pawn and then when they go for it, they run into this kind of problem, right? And now we don't know what's happening. White might be better. Nice move. Clearly b4 was a little too soon. And let's talk about this position. To me, it feels a little bit like white is being a little bit superficial by allowing all your pieces to do all their dirty work. And this would be an interesting position to think about, I think. What am I saying? Well, what I'm saying is I don't really like rook f8 because it seems passive. Do I necessarily have a better move? Maybe not, but I just want to say that in principle I don't like it. Yeah, and I think the nice way to do it is to say, do you really want that pawn? Let's say he takes it. Then I say, do you really have a spot for the bishop? And I think the answer is no. And that's very typical when white goes on an adventure and has closed off one of his pieces, like he's done here. Right. So rook f8, 10 lashes. I'm probably going to get some nasty comments talking about my lashes. But the general point is, right, we don't want to be passive in the endgame. Knight e4 goes back. Okay. This is some funny business. I don't understand. I don't understand any of it. I didn't get it. Maybe I was being superficial in my analysis with this, but I didn't understand any of that. I didn't understand anything, Marty. Maybe I should have spent more time with it. I didn't understand. Okay, so let's go back here. That whole mess happened there. I'm sure both sides made mistakes, but let's think about this. Bishop c3, let's call that a good move. King h7, or h5 rather. It would make life simpler, I think, if you played b5 directly. Because you're going to be guaranteed to win. As long as you win this pawn and push b4, then you're golden. Right? h5 is not really... Yeah, it's like you're playing to hold that pawn, but now it's going to become a little bit hard to hold the pawn. And I still think you've got to be winning here. But of course, it's become a little bit hokey, right? Bishop d4 looks very strong to me. And I'm sure you just missed that move, after which I guess it has become a little bit complicated. Yeah, and that's a bummer. And I guess now we have to say it's a draw. And so it all fell apart right there. Okay. Let's stop there. All right, we're headed on to Vishnu's game. And I have a story for Vishnu. Vishnu has been on the show a bunch, and as a present, he came to me at this cherry blossom tournament where I had the worst tournament of my life, and he gave me this beautiful book, and it's very hard to find. I had talked about it in some of the shows. I think one of the best books of all time. So I didn't bring it with me to St. Louis. I hadn't thought about it. And so I'm there on like the first night. I'm just kind of unpacking and stuff. And the head of the club comes in and it's just real nonchalantly, real casual. And she's like, hey, you want to go out to dinner with Rex and Kasparov tonight? And I'm like, oh man, of course I said yes, but I was kind of scared, like to meet somebody like that is kind of like you know, kind of an amazing thing. Anyways, Vishnu was really cool because I got to talk to him, I even got to talk to him about the book and stuff. And he was saying how he, was back in the day in Soviet times, and he wrote it on like an East German typewriter, you know. Yeah, if I had taken it, I would have gotten it signed, of course. And then this is a testament to how expensive this book is. The club manager was like, "Oh yeah, I want to get a copy of that book. What's the name of that book? Blah blah blah." And so he got it, and I guess he got a hardcover copy of the thing, and I think he paid like 400 for it. He paid 400 for this book here that we've got. All right, so that's just my little story of Kasparov, and maybe someday I'll reminisce with Vishnu what happened that night. Though of course, it was just me being mostly starstruck. Okay, let's get into it. Queen c2. As I've said before, I don't like this move for Vishnu. And the main reason is, well, first, I don't approve of the move in general because you're going to lose tempi in an effort to gain that dark square bishop. And then it's going to be dangerous, right? Because you're playing for this really long-term abstract quality that you're going to pay for in time. So I'm going to get into the game a little bit. I'm going to give a sample version for what I think the long-term goal might look like, okay? So there's many different ways black can play here, and that's part of the problem. It's very hard to learn this thing. So snip, snip, d5, knight d7, e3, b6, and as Vishnu notes, this is a funny business move because it's inviting queen c6. So knight f3 was played, and that's the human move. Well, I don't know. Actually, no. The human move is definitely to play queen c6 and to pound on it. As I'm going to skip the notes, but yeah, it's not surprising that queen c6 is winning. Okay, but knight f3, h6, bishop b7, bishop d3, rook c8, and now knight e5. And I think it's an interesting thing. So for those of you who are just joining the show, Vishnu has been on the show many times. And at his best, we've seen Vishnu play very strong attacking chess, and this game will ultimately become an example of that. This opening, though, is really aiming for something deeper, and what it's aiming for is basically a claim that this bishop is amazing. That's the claim. You're investing all these tempi, queen c2, a3, queen takes c3, investing all that time with the intention of saying later that that bishop on h4 is a real dreamboat. So it's not, though, with the intention of playing crazy, whacked out attacking moves like knight e5. Right. Now, first of all, I want to say this position, I think your opponents played not great. By the way, Vishnu in his notes calls this kid, I think he calls him a young player or something like that. And it's this funny joke I have where I've lost or he says a talented boy. I've lost these kids before, and it's very painful. And, it seems like they're so young you can't even mention their name on air. So now we're just calling them like a talented boy. Right? In this position, I want to show a game of Kasparov's, actually, where it came out of a different opening, but I felt is really instructive about what this kind of position is looking for. So this game is from the 1984 match of Kasparov against Smyslov. Smyslov is an old man at this point, and one of the interesting things about this match is that Smyslov, whose games of anybody I've studied the most, really was of such an old school that, for him, the knights were just as good as the bishops. He would definitely say there's a certain scenario where the knights are worse than the bishops. But he would say something like, well, there's an equal number where the knights are better. And this game, I think in particular, is one where he got nailed. He got nailed real bad, and it was an eye-opener for me too. So here he goes. This is the annals of the unopposed dark square bishop and what it's up to, I think. So this was a variation, Queen d2, which Kasparov invented mostly, or popularized. And we're going to waste some time to keep our dark square bishop there on g5. Now you look at this position, you could say, so what, right? Okay, knight f8. Smyslov would never even dream about taking that pawn on a3. Bishop g3, bishop e6. Now watch this. Kasparov goes to this endgame. c4. And I can imagine Smyslov thinking maybe this isn't so dangerous. Takes, takes, knight b6, knight b3. Really inspiring game. So the knight is going to harass black with knight a5. And I want us to pay attention to this incredible bishop here. Basically, it has squares that black doesn't. And the dream of the knight is not so much just to win this pawn, but to pivot through a square like b7 and then land as an octopus on d6, where it will be very hard to challenge it because the bishop on g3 is unopposed. Let's look at what happened. I don't want to spend too much time. I was actually late in my preparations because I got caught looking at this game again. Get the bishop out of the way. Knight a5. Okay, so you take on d4. I'm going to get b7, and I'm going to dream about knight d6. d5. Do you want to trade everything off? You can. But then knight b7 will still come. So to amateur eyes, this just looks like some kind of draw. But then you start looking at it deeper, and it's like, oh no. Oh no, this knight is a little bit out of play, and this bishop is amazing. Absolutely amazing. So, and I know Smyslov, he was trying to get some kind of blockading position with his knights here. And it looks again like, well, what does white have? c5, thank you very much. And beautiful move. We're aiming, if this rook moves now off of this and gets frisky with, say, this, you got to start wondering about bishop a6, bishop b7. And notice also, if black were to get counterplay, be it this pawn, oh no, but that bishop's there, and we don't have control of the dark squares. So black said, all right, I'll trade. And now we have, oh, incredible domination. Looks again like black is solidified. And here we go. Yeah, really, really a bummer now. I guess it's lost. Bishop a6, and look, that's it. We're coming to c8. So it's only move 33, and the game's over. Rook d6 happens, and I don't know. I'm going to stop there because I think this is technically winning. Rook f6 happened. Game ended, I don't know, 6 more moves. So that's the kind of thing. But you can tell it takes a lot of skill. A lot of skill. It's very impressive to play like that with the bishop. So anyways, that's, I think, what the dream is, Vishnu. That's what the dream is when you play this way with trying to get that unopposed dark square bishop. That's what you're ultimately going for, and the skill that you're trying to create. Now, I was looking at this position. I think you're right with knight e5, that tickling the knight on d7 is a nice idea. You could, of course, just castle. But if you wanted to tickle, I think bishop f5 is much more unpleasant. Because here, it's even if you don't take on d7, you're still doing something nice. And it's not clear, I think, that you want, when you play knight e5, that you want him to trade. On e5, and he can do it, and I think, as you noted in your notes, this looks pretty equalish, right? Doesn't seem like much is going on. So, right, knight e5, g5, okay. Always a little controversial, Now let's just say something. Of course, if he was going to do this with knight e4, he should just take immediately on e5. There's no need to be crazy like this. I want to say this was an interesting decision that I spent some time over. And it kind of freaked me out that you did DE. I think it's ultimately like, okay. I think it's okay. But I think the dream of this opening is to play bishop takes e5. Like, yeah, if you were following a recipe book, this would be the bishop e5 would be the recipe, to play that way. Because you're so solid and you're going to just make a long-term claim about how that bishop is much better. Whereas after DE, things are going to get kind of hectic. And I know you like that. I know you well enough that you like that kind of thing. But hectic in two ways. One, the structure is harmed. But two, what black should be dreaming of soon is a move like d4. That's the thing that scares me. So here we go. Queen c2. Let's pretend queen e7 is fine. And I think you wrote in the notes the computer wanted to play castles either here or soon. And that's a thought, but it's scary. I mean, because something like pawn all the way down is going to be a brutal, fact of life that's a little bit hard to calculate. So queen e2 and, king g7, not thrilled with, right? And he begins black starts his own problems here with king g7. He's ultimately, I feel he's trying to grub a pawn. He wants to say, oh, I want like to take here, and then, you're not going to be threatening this pawn, and I'll win the pawn. I'll be really thrilled, right? So he needs to think of something else. And you wrote in your notes f5 seemed good. That's certainly a thought. Okay, so king g7, and you continued your madness with queen h5, and this is, I think, a good moment where the danger is you're doing what we call play on the wing, and black's first instinct here should be play in the center. And so just the first thing that should go through this kid's mind is d4. And very simple is that if you take the thing, let's say you take, we're going to play one of the rooks to d8. I don't know that one, right? And we will win that thing back, and then I don't know. I can't say what's happening here anymore. It's too frightening, right? Okay. Now, one interesting thing. Let's look at the game now. So, queen h5. And the kid kind of loses it here in full passivity mode. And that's an interesting thing in itself. Because these kids maybe this kid has a puzzle rush score of like a gazillion, right? But a puzzle rush score of that won't stop you from making moves like rook h8, where the problem is it's passive and ultimately has an even worse idea of bringing the other rook in, like that. Oh, excuse me, he hasn't done it yet, like that. And that's just not what you want. I don't understand his moves either with c5, c4. And watch this. This is a horrendous move here. Takes, exclam, right? So this is the kind of position that Vishnu plays well. And let's just look. The kid has been obsessed with pawns, and let's give it to him. He got all these isolated pawns, and it looks like a destruction zone there. But then you look closer, and it's like, this is absolutely abysmal. And where does this king actually hope to go? Unclear, right? Very unclear. So here, I think Vishnu notes bishop d7 here is winning. His move, it's hard to imagine that's not winning, right? Thank you very much. You can have your pawn. Total passivity on f8. I think here is, I think Vishnu noted something like bishop e6 is a nice idea, just so you penetrate to e7. And I agree, that's nice. Watch what he does to the poor kid. Put your rook on e7. Kid thinks he's doing something special. He's not doing anything. White to play and win. Snap. Good night. Absolutely over. Beautiful, beautiful chess. It's really time to resign, but they don't resign. Never resign in these positions. Okay. So yeah, this all happened, and then the deep pawn's going to fall. So beautiful game, attacking game that really, when we think about it, right, it happened because black became passive. And I think also, Vishnu, it's an interesting thing that if you want to expand into this kind of positional way of playing, you have to say to yourself, well, right, that's what I'm doing. There's a lot of games I've seen with this dynamic. Another game you could look up is one from the Summer Classic that I was just at, and I believe it was Jeffrey Zhang against Darius Svirts. It's hard to spell his name, but I think I can do it. Swiercz. I think I got that right. Anyways, that was a similar game out of a different opening with the dark square bishop doing its dance into the black position. Okay, let's move on. With Vishnu's game, we're moving into a section that, at least in my mind, is mostly to do with attacking games. And we always have Amit here, and Amit's always going to play a good attacking game. So let's check it out. Amit admitted in his notes that he's only submitting games that he's super proud of. Amit, do some games, that you have questions about. And in general, that's my advice for people out there, is that, it's great to have your game presented as a beautiful game. But, give us some games. It doesn't have to be a game you played terribly, but just games that, you looked at and you were just like, I have no idea what was happening in this game. All right, so knight f6. I thought, by the way, that the idea of this bishop f4 variation was to play like d5 here. I thought that was the grand notion of playing bishop f4. I'm always insulted a little bit by bishop f4. I want the guy to play knight f3 first. Okay, so here we go. Snip. It's kind of an interesting move to snip like this. It might be fine, but you're putting yourself out on a limb after playing kind of what I call security blanket chess, right? When they put this London security blanket, it seems odd to break it now. There was a game, by the way, today, where in kind of an interesting way, Fabi played g3, bishop g2 against the Slav. You can imagine similar to this structure. So, and in that case too, it was like, should you be playing dc? Well, a dynamic move. Knight d2 I don't like too much, and the reason is there's a lot of these positions, I think, where white might want his queen active on the d file, and knight d2 blocks it. Okay, so this is what we get, and d5, really interesting, and Amit's just like, I want to kill this guy, and I don't mind sacking the pawn. Now, of course, though, white should take the thing. White has to take this thing on d6 en passant, and something like, I don't know, knight c4, right? I got to do it. Because what happens now is Amit just has fantastic central control, and from that central control, we're going to see that it's easier to create an attack. And that's totally what Amit does here. It's very impressive. Check it out. Knight e2. So look, the minors are dominated by those big fat central pawns. Rook e8, h5. Very good. Knight g4. Very nice. And watch this. Hello. This is like Vishnu style, right? No one knows what white's doing, but we know what black's doing. Now here I'm going to say I like knight g4 better, because on bishop g4, I felt like white could try f3 here. And at least then it seems like maybe he has better chances. He has some chances to hold. As it was, he played queen d2, h3 exclam, bishop f3 exclam, and let's just say that Amit has to be strategically winning here. c4. And I didn't look at this too closely here, just because I feel like it's totally winning. But maybe we could spend a moment. It feels like, yeah, there should be something more direct. Amit plays just madman chess. Check this out. He goes here and allows this thing, which I still think he's crushing. But the weird thing was, it was not certain to me that he wanted the queen on g5. Knight f5. It's actually a little bit remarkable that white is still alive. I would like to take with the pawn, and the simple reason is, and I'm going to say it's just over with the pawn, because with bishop takes, we're allowing white to dream about someday pushing the f-pawn, right? And again, I think we should probably go back to f3 instead of knight h4. Good move, right? Good move, f4. Now it's not so clear, especially after the straight of queens. So all of a sudden, things got complicated. Am I being wrong there? Maybe I'm being wrong. Let's look again. So maybe Amit would just tell me this is totally winning. Let's see. So f4, snip. Snip, queen d5. Snip, snip. And how bad is this? Let me just say, I believe in black's position, but I'm not totally convinced. Like, maybe I can get away with a move like king f2, right? Something like that. In the game, white allowed this, and this is no bueno, because then this happens, and this is what Amit lives for. Look at this. Look at this. Check to the miserable king. You can go queen your pawn. Mate. Oh man, I'm telling you guys, Amit just murders guys. He's totally nailing guys. We've seen several games like this, in fact. Yeah, from the famous Amit. Okay. Let's look at Trefkuskin. Trefkuskin's had some rough games that he's prevented, also known as Tim. But this game, I felt, played beautifully. So let's check it out. This, of course, is the very topical position in the Petrov. And the good news for black here is there are simply loads of different plans for him to choose from here. And he didn't have to castle right away either. In fact, I think I like the positions where he doesn't castle right away. It's opposite sides castling. It's going to be violent. And in general, white wants to do something like h4 and knight g5. Knight e5. And here, I think Tim rightly notes that bishop e2 doesn't necessarily make sense. And it's an example where you kind of need to understand what's going on in the position. Because when you think about it, it's like, well, what... White doesn't know necessarily where the bishop on f1 wants to go. And really, the bishop on f1 doesn't need to go anywhere if the rook on h1 can move. So my sense is that the kind of move that they like to play here is a move like h4. So bishop e2 loses the tempo, and now bishop e6 was fine, I'm going to say. But knight g4, I'm going to also say, was very interesting. Because I think we're going to steal his bishop. And if we steal his bishop, it's going to be hard for him to attack us. And this bishop will be a very strong unopposed bishop. It's just annoying, too, right? And I think, what was I looking at? Bishop d4. I didn't see... I mean, maybe he has some way of getting tricky on us. Maybe he does actually have a trick here with h3. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is actually more tricky. Maybe we've tricked ourselves on this one. Okay, so maybe I'll take it back. I'll take it back. But knight g4 was at least the move I was tempted by. Bishop e6. And right, white lost a tempo there. Bishop d3. Right? Obviously, he wanted to do that in one tempo instead of two. And now, I like black's play a lot. c5. Queen a5. And it's a very simple business, I feel, where it's attacks on opposite wings. So whoever is going to get the initiative is likely going to win. A3. And here's a move I think is instructive. Remember, kind of like I was talking with the opposite color bishops, when you have attack on opposite wings, it means that the value of the initiative is going to go up. It's always important, but the value of the initiative just went up because it's going to lead to mate A. That means the value of material is going down. And if you can start pushing on the queen side, white's not going to be able to push on the king side. So the move that immediately comes to mind, that I don't know what the computer would say, but I'm pretty sure just creates vast grief here, is b5. And you ask white, you ask him, do you really want to take this thing and allow rook b8 with tempo? And maybe that's what he's going to do, and maybe it was what he has to do, right? Because b4 is such a strong threat as well. But this looks like true misery to me, because we will have the initiative. We will have the initiative going forward here. White is not going to be able to play against our king. Okay, so rook a b8, and now white plays at least a clever move here with f4, where our natural move of taking is met by bishop f4 and tickling our rook. So that's a little bit unpleasant. But I guess that's what we had to do, because after b5, which was our intention, white for sure needed to play f5, after which he might have the initiative, and this bishop is a little bit uncomfortable. So this move by Tim's opponent, I think, is very instructive. He wants to steal the pawn, and like I said, the pawn is not going to be important, or it's going to be far less important in positions where one side where we have opposite sides castling, or we have an attack on the king, like we do here. Because Tim is going to mate you. That's why. b4. Vishnu, thanks so much. And someday I'll tell you the story of meeting Kasparov and yada yada. It was a pretty cool time. It was also cool just to mention that book and have him talk about it a little bit. All right. So I think white is lost here. Queen a4. And watch this move. Tim really nails him here. Smack. Check to the miserable king, and it's all over. If king b1, queen a2. If you get in the way, it is mate. So very nice game, Tim. And I think, when we were talking about understanding openings, and of course, that position coming out of that opening, you could turn on the computer and do yada yada, but you really want to ultimately understand what's going on. And I thought, yeah, beautiful. You initiative, and then you mate the guy. And that's what white should have done, or at least tried to have done to you. It's funny, some people first look at that position and say, oh, this is equal. But it's not. It's like mate. Someone's going to get mated. Someone's going to get mated in that position. Actually, a really good game. One of my favorite games in recent years was this variation in the candidates match with Karyakin playing white against Fabi, and he played a great game. It was one of the games that I think is the only game Fabi lost. I have a bad memory of that kind of stat, but that's my memory of it. Okay, let's look at Jude's game here. All right, so e4, e5, g6. Now, terrible news, people. I am in hot Baltimore. I have to turn on the fan or else I'm going to die. It might make a little bit of a sound, so I turned it off, but it's way too hot here. I'm going to turn it on for 5 minutes. Tell me if it was too intense. If I can keep it running, it would be good for my health. Okay. So, this is an old-style Soviet thing, this g6 move. And the basic reason it's controversial is that you are spending an extra tempo to bring your bishop out, whereas you've already brought your bishop out with e5. The good news about it is the old-time Soviet dudes in the Rui, they, like Smyslov, for example, invented this really interesting, like you could call it like a strong point variation, where you put everything on e5. Like there was some variation, I think it was bishop e7, f6. It's kind of ugly looking, but the idea was to strong point e5, and I think that's the intention here with g6. There's obviously a bunch of different moves white can do here. I think a modern approach might be to actually play h4 now. But here we go. Castles, c3, good. d6, d4. Jude mentions that bishop takes c6 is totally a thought, but I like this better as well. All right, bishop b3, good. Let's read what he wrote. By the way, I haven't been reading too much of the notes. I will say, though, that there's a lot of great notes in here from the games submitted. And like I said at the beginning of the show, I feel the notes definitely are improving. So, probably a bad idea to move the same piece again in the opening, but at the time I thought this was a good move. The bishop is well placed on this diagonal, and the move is also prophylaxis against b5. Though again, of course, he'd be giving you a tempo if he did do b5. All right. So, now he writes, the downside though is that it begs black to play knight a5, after which white has to move the bishop again. That's kind of true, but the knight is also misplaced on a5. I think the cool thing about this move is, I guess, an intention that you didn't have in the game. And you write rook e1 would be better, and it's definitely normal. Let's just say rook e1 is just kind of natural move that people do. Let me admit to something here. I played the Rui when I was a kid, and of course, I'm so old that it was all the kind of way to learn the Rui was to look at Fischer games. And what I want to admit here, okay, is that back then, to me, this c3 d4 thing was all about, fighting for the center or something like that. And now, as an old man, I see it more as a thing where the pawn on c3 is mostly aimed at dominating the knight. And the pawn on d4, it's questionable how much it actually helps you. For one, it's going to give black this opportunity, to take whenever he wants, and you taking never is that helpful. And that's something, I guess, it's not just as an old man, but of course Carlsen and a lot of other GMs following him now are playing these slow systems with d3. And they seem so innocuous at first, but if you get a sense for them, they're obviously quite dangerous. Knight e7, and here's a great variation that I really like that Jude writes for us here, which is knight g5, which is often a superficial move. Castles f4, very nice. And let's just say, I'm often against moving the f pawn, but here I definitely like it, because the reasons to be against the f-pawn are a lot of times it actually blocks in your bishop and your rook doesn't achieve the glory it wants. But here, it will achieve the glory. If black takes this way, then we've clearly just ended this knight and we can play bishop f4, and both the bishop and the rook are in the game. And the great variation that white gives here, that Jude gives, is takes f5, and whoa, what a beauty. Really nice move, and I guess it's lost. If, for example, gf, we've got queen h5. So very nice. That's right, no rematch. I believe, and I think it was Smyslov's intuition. No rematch is saying bishop g7 is something Smyslov did as well. And I think before he did this, he was doing this weird bishop e7. It's very strange, like knight d7, bishop e7, bishop f6 thing, where he had a number of famous games where you probably shouldn't have, a little passive, but back in the day it was like the way to be strong. And I think that's the intention here too, to strong point the e5 square. And f4 here really eliminates it. So, one reason I really can't quibble with bishop b3 is it kind of seems like it's preventing the natural knight e7. In a not entirely dissimilar position, Carlsen played h6 today against Mamedyarov. No, excuse me, against Nepo. And I thought he was a little worse. He ended up winning. That was a different position, honestly, with it because it was from a Rosalimo, but the wasted tempo was similar. Yeah. Okay. So, knight e7, rook e1, h3. So now look, white is doing what he does, right? This is the way you're supposed to do things. a4. Now let's write hear what he says. Here I felt very good about my position. It's difficult to find a good plan for my opponent. The a4 was played in part to allow my bishop to escape to a2 in the event of a5, knight a5. After which the b4 advance is a difficult problem, or is a problem for white. I felt I was better at this point, even though it's difficult to develop my queenside pieces. It seems even harder for black to find something useful to do. Okay. Yeah, a4 is a provocative move, and maybe it's fine. Obviously the question mark is just about your pieces on the queen side. And I'm going to guess what probably floated through your mind was, well, if I play bishop e3, then knight a5, and then bishop c2, then knight c4. And it's true, it's a little bit funky. I don't want to give you my bishop on e3, right? And especially I don't want to solve the knight on c4. So, back in the day we used to give annotations. Actually, let's see if I can do it. I think I can do a little annotation. We used to do this annotation, which meant like enterprising move. Actually, excuse me, not there. I did it on the wrong move. Oh, man. I don't want to clear all analysis. Remove annotation. There we go. I want to put this thing here. So there we go. Right. So just an enterprising move, and it's enterprising because black, you do have intentions, and black needs to find something useful soon. Let's see what he does. Knight a5, and that's just got to be terrible, right? It's like your a4 is really set up for this knight a5 because now the knight is not working on a5. So I would say for those of you playing the Rui, whether you put your pawn on d3 or d4, one common feature I see in practical play is that it's hard for black to solve the problem of his c6 knight. And this position right here gives us a good opportunity to just think about what would be a good move for him. And I think we've given him a lot of time, and I think he should be able to find a good plan. And the plan I like, just that at least just pops out to me right here, is the barbaric g5. Why? Because, well, I want to fix this knight, and then I might want to bring this guy back. And that knight on g6 will be incredibly strong. Yeah, and I do not want to leave my pressure on d4 because, as we've seen, it's kind of like giving you some grief over there. So if you play normally, like bishop e3, knight g6, knight d2, well, black has a lot of promising thoughts now. The simplest of which is just to thud the knight into f4. And yeah, this this would be a pleasant position to play. By the way, I'm talking a lot about these games just because I'm following them, but a real mischanced was, well, first of all, we've had a couple h6 g5s, okay? So there was Nepo against Anand, and Nepo won that game. That was a different h6 g5, but a similar brutal idea. And then Karyakin was actually playing, surprisingly, against Nepo as white, so Nepo had white, and Karyakin had the h6 g5. And that game ended in a draw, but it was very strange to me because it felt like black definitely had the initiative. Okay, so let's look at what happened. c5. Um, let's read what he writes. At the time, I thought this was a mistake because after the continuation, takes, queen d6, white has a killer queen on d6, and black's bishop on g7 and pawn on e5 no longer exert any pressure on white. I thought I was basically winning here, but I had completely missed my opponent's next move and the counterplay it generates. Okay, so this is where studying the old Fischer games, if you're a Rui player, I think really is helpful. Um, the plan that Fischer used against the Chigorin, which, imagine you've got a pawn, the pawn would be here, and the white bishop would be here, is to say something about pieces and pawn structure here. Namely, that this square can be accessed by my pieces, whereas your pawns are redundant over here. Now, in the Chigorin positions, black's only counterplay is to do some kind of business like this. And so, queen d6 has two problems. One, it allows c4, which is just a big problem in itself. But more importantly, it kind of misses the point of what I think is, in my mind, what's going on, which is that white's advantage is to play against this square, and the Fischer standard plan is to play knight d2, f1, e3, and then smack it on in with an advantage to white. And the nice thing too about knight d2, let's just say, some simple points. We prevent c4 and we develop our bishop, right? Huge important deals. We don't even have to play knight f1 next. We could see what black does, and we can play a waiting move with our queen, either queen c2 or queen e2. And let's say that I think you have a promising version of the structure as well, because this bishop truly is a dream. Okay, so queen d6, and in fact we get c4, exclam. Knight e5, and notice what we've done here. We have activated the bishop on g7, bishop e6, good move. Queen takes, rook takes, and this is an interesting position to think about. Knight f3. My gut reaction is that this has to be better for black. I don't have any specific analysis or anything like that when I say that. It's just something that seems like our pieces are so strong and our development so good that we should be better. Now, that said, black still has to play well here. I'm going to turn off my loud fan. Black still has to find a good plan. In time, it's one of these things where he has to use it well. And let's just talk a little bit about black's problems. This knight is funny, and this knight is funny. And white has an annoying threat that we're going to see in the game of bishop e3 and bishop e6. So it's not immediately easy to see how we are going to crack white here. The default solution, I'll call it that if I can, is to play g5, bishop e3, and then knight b3. I don't really want to do it, okay? But this position is definitely a good position where we have to say black has good compensation. I'm not thrilled with it, honestly. Let me take it back, though, because I just want to see if I can find something better. Yeah, it's really interesting. Normally, when you've got this kind of thing and these pieces are so mangled, we'd be able to find something clear. But like I said, these two pieces are funny. Let's see if I can do better. Um, maybe I don't, maybe I don't have anything special. Okay, well, how about we do like G5, Bishop E3, and the very basic. No, I was about to say Knight C6, but it's not so impressive because after Knight D2 or something, even there, actually, let's say, even there, then I can do some kind of B5 thing. Okay, as you're seeing, I believe in Black's position, but it's not too easy for me to find something, to punish White's lack of development. People who've watched the show long enough know that I'm a tempo fiend, and I want to punish those criminals who forget to develop their pieces. All right, B5. And now Jude says, after bishop e3, I was mad at myself after this move for developing my bishop with a one-move threat rather than looking seriously for a better alternative. But you are developing the bishop, right? Great. Great that you're developing the bishop. And he needs to get developed, right? That guy needs to do something. Rook a b8. And now knight bd2, giving back the pawn, which, is an interesting thought. Of course, let's say the natural move would be ab. But here too, there's something like rook b5. Now maybe what we're addressing here in bishop e3, in the grief over bishop e3 that Jude has, is that he feels he should be better here because of the pawn or something, and maybe after b5 he could claim it, but it's not so simple. Notice that if you play AB, that would be terrible because knight b3 is coming with a lot of zing. Well, maybe we should take that back too. We could play knight a3. Maybe that's what you should do. And maybe a simpler way to do it even is after b5 to play knight a3 directly. Yeah, that seems a little cleaner. Though on rook a b8, since we're going to take anyway, you could transpose. Well, right now it's difficult. Okay. I'm coming around. I'm coming around to Jude's way of thinking. The problem is now, let's just say, he can take with a rook, but let's just imagine he takes with a pawn. The other grief that we're dealing with here is the threat of b4. I don't know, though. I don't know here, right? So this is a very concrete position. Well, this is really interesting, actually. So let's first look at what happens in the game where we turn to this position. Basically giving back the pawn in exchange for developing my pieces and hoping to liquidate the position before I get steamrolled. Snip. Knight d4. Interesting move. Now, here's some choices for black. In the game he does this, but it's probably a mistake because knight takes, pawn takes, knight takes. At least let's call it a mistake on principle. The white pieces are getting active if you play knight c4. In the game, black came up with rook a2 and this trade, and it's a huge mess, but we can say that black's position is structurally challenged, right? Okay, we're going to come back to this position, and I just want to see, I haven't used a computer or anything, I just want to see what kind of thing, okay, I'm going to say knight a3 was good, and after bishop e3, rook a b8. One interesting thing is that on AB, if he does rook takes, Okay. If he does rook takes, you could make a claim that bishop c1 is actually a golden move. It looks terrible, I realize that, but you will have knight a3, and there is no way for him to talk to this b2 pawn, which is the only purpose of the rook there. And of course he is, creating his own problems by shattering his own pawns like that. So that's a funny thing. I want to say I did not like b5 at first. And the reason is simple. Now you play, a b, knight a3. It seems like white has no trouble. It's a funny position. I'm still thinking about it. Like, oh, black has to, have something here. Okay, I know I'm pressed. I know I've talked about it too much. Let me try this weird looking move here. And our intention will be maybe b5, but let's say bishop e3. And we've got a couple interesting options. One is rook d3 with the intention of doubling. The other would be, yeah, I think that looks good. The kind of long-term other thought was maybe I want to do this, and I'm still unhappy with that though. No rush on that. Something maybe rook d3. Okay. Again, I'm sorry. I'm going off the deep end because my mind is fascinated by the position. So, knight f3, b5, bishop e3, rook a b8, knight d2. Right, now it's going to get weirder than we wanted it to be. Snip, snip. And obviously it's a sad day when the opponent's rook gets to penetrate. Takes, 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 takes. All right, now we got this position, and we have to wonder what's going on. Black plays h5, and Jude, I think, rightly criticizes it. Not only is it a tempo, but you're giving our bishop some possibilities with bishop g5. I don't know exactly what's going on here, but I do want to say I would rather be white. Just because the knight on e7 isn't great, and the fact that our structure is a little bit better suggests to me that maybe we have some chances if we can keep the rooks on. One variation that Jude gives here is to force the exchange of rooks, like this. And then he says bishop h6. I was thinking bishop h6 was bad after white plays here and here, a5. Right, and the thing is, you imagine it's going to be actually pretty hard for that pawn to advance. And in the meantime, I think our king is better. And there are also, it's not just that you have two extra pawns on the king side, but there's all these weaknesses in there that we're going to hope to patrol. Let's put it that way. So, funnily enough, it's a really amazing transition to the endgame because it felt for a second that black was being active, but he lands here, and I think he's just worse. Let's go back a second here. ba, knight d4, rook b2, snip, snip, snip. And we'd love to have a good move here, but it's hard to imagine another move besides rook a2. Maybe we should be thinking here of not trading on a1, right? Why are we trading on a1? Maybe rook c2 is a little bit more interesting. Let's call that a little bit more interesting. Part of the idea is that, I don't know, let's just say we take here for kicks first, is that the rook will latently protect these c-squares, which will be interesting for us a little bit later. And the rook on e1 now doesn't have any great squares. Yeah, it doesn't have great squares. Notice if he goes here, we can snip and win on d1. So yeah, fascinating endgame position where white is suddenly better. h5, definitely a funky move. Alright, let's read what he wrote. Bishop c5 question mark. Trying to take advantage of the fact that the knight on e7 has nowhere to go. I was down to about 20 minutes at this point, so I had to move quickly. But foolishly didn't even look for alternative moves. And he writes, knight b7 looks winning. And what's funny about this, we just looked at that Kasparov game earlier, and here we're going to have a similar like post-up move on c5, and that game was a post-up move on d6. And right, the thing to realize when you're white here is that, as we actually said in an earlier game, I think it was with St. Nick or somebody earlier on, with the knight and rook, you can do amazing attacking chess, and yeah, all those weaknesses in the black camp are really hard to deal with. If you wanted to be really boring, in fact, I'm sure you could play g3 here, and you're still just telling black that you're better because your structure is so much more solid. And from a positional standpoint, the reason bishop c5 is a little funky is if black just protects it, which you could have done with just say king f7, well, right, with king f7, with bishop e7 you can throw in rook d1, you don't really want to take it, and king f7 is certainly a move that he would like to do. Again, I want to play king f7, right? Of course I want to bring my king in. Knight b3, check. And now black has counterplay. Okay, so we have an interesting ending, and let's read what he wrote. I thought this would be winning for white, but I was wrong. Well, let's say that you have some good practical chances here in this position. Yeah, I think you have good chances. So let's think about it. Knight c5 is a sad move because after rook d2, even though black has to play some move like bishop d6 to stop us taking on e6. Actually, that's not even true. I have a feeling he can get away with bishop g3 and takes and king f7. In either case, the real problem is our king has been shunted to the back, and we're not going to win with our king shunted. So let's just look at this for a second to see. Obviously it's a little bit frustrating, but let's look in this position other ways that maybe we could have played here. First of all, the knight isn't going anywhere, and you wrote about rook a7. Right. It's a really interesting one. So the thing first of all, just intuitively, I don't like about bishop takes e7 is the only reason we're doing it, right, is to give the knight a square. But the knight is doing a job over here of defending against that. Okay. And I was beginning to say why I didn't like bishop e7. The reason I don't like bishop e7 is that is not a good piece on e7. So, all right, our problem is simple. We have counterplay against our king that we have to deal with. And it's not so easy. It may be impossible, but let's see what we can do. I like rook a7. Let's give the variation that you discarded here. Well, let me say I'm a little bit disappointed with rook a7 just because that rook I felt was better, but maybe it's not just because our rook is coming down to d3. Let's call this clear advantage in the sense that you have an extra pawn and that's your weakness that you have. Okay, so let's give a shot to bishop e7, and the problem for me is on king g2, first of all, king g2 would be a tricky move. On rook d3, you have the glorious rook takes e6. And he's got knight c, and if king e6, knight c5, and I'll call that position winning. So, king g2, bishop g3 concerns me more, though. But I think we have a nice shot here after bishop g3, namely knight c5. And I think we have a little juice here. It might still be a draw, but there's... black has to be careful here. On rook c7, which I guess is the move that concerns me most. At the very least, we can go for that rook and pawn ending that isn't so easy for black. We might have a better way to do this, but at the very least, it looks like we can get that. Okay, so knight c5, check. And the thing that you should say about this to yourself is that you probably aren't going to win with a passive king like that. Good move. Check the miserable king. And now, if you're going to win, it would have to be some kind of tricky thing, right? But it's hard to imagine what that's going to be. Check. By the way, it's like this check. Okay. Good move. Check. Check. Knight e5. Yeah, it's still an interesting position. Bishop c7. Here rook c5 makes some sense to me. Check. And now we got ourselves a draw-ish position, but is it totally over? That move I felt was very dangerous to play king f6. I know the reason he did it was he was thinking about this kind of thing. But I think, again, you are simply penetrating, and this should be enough to, I think, easily hold the draw, and then move the rook somewhere, like here. Yeah. Okay, but he did that, king f6. Passive, which has been his problem for a while now, right? It has been passive. Now, it is probably a draw, but let's see if we have any tricks. Rook c4, king e5, and the move that I would at least want to think about here before we give up would be king f2. And the reason is, it probably is a draw here, but doesn't... Yeah, it's probably a draw. No, this is going to be a draw. Okay, I take it all back. I take it all back. I just thought maybe we could massage him a little bit. So that was a really interesting game. There were several points back in here that I thought were interesting, and I guess what we're saying is this one seems the last shot with king g2 with the dirty trick of rook d3, rook e6, and bishop g3, knight c5. Yeah. I really enjoyed that game. All these games, some I get sucked into more than others, but I really enjoyed that one. All right, here we go. Paul in New Jersey. Paul in New Jersey's been on the show several times. And he makes a chess crime in a little bit here that I want him to pay attention to. So, to me, this position is kind of like just an idea, this position is. Where white is saying, I'm going to put my pawns on light squares to fight against your unopposed light square bishop, and I'm going to try to keep my position solid and maybe eventually work against your double pawns, and try to claim really that the bishop on c8 doesn't have an easy way to participate in the position. And so for that reason, the basic move that you can make without thinking would be d3. That, let's just call that the traditional modern way of playing against the Rosalimo, almost regardless of what the guy does. if you look up, any recent GM games, whether it's the BC structure or the DC, you're going to see this D3 move. I'm going to guess as well that E5 is also an interesting move here, and maybe the variation would go something crazy like this. But that's thought for another day. Okay, what is the crime that Fall in New Jersey did here? He played D4, and now the danger that I want him to see is that black is getting way too much pawns, and those pawns will have the hurtful effect of potentially dominating his pieces. The next move is a crime by black. To me, the simple one is just to play e5. Notice this knight dominates this guy, and if you do something fancy like knight f5, I assume we're just going to do either d6 or g6, one of those moves. And especially because the knight on c3 is dominated, it looks very promising to me for black. Instead, he says, you know what, I'm interested. This is what he's saying to you, Paul. He's saying, I'm interested in giving you my beautiful bishop. Well, you should help him out if he wants to give you his bishop. Here you have a number of good moves. e5 makes a lot of sense to me now, right? e5, and I would say if he gives you this bishop, you just don't worry about it. It is so insane for him to do that with both this kind of thing happening and or queen g4. Both of them look incredibly annoying. So right, I feel like he bluffed you with bishop b4. You played queen f3, and then he did his terrible intention. And you should have said, oh, thank you very much. Now I'm going to crush you till the cows come home. This, I think, is strategically lost, Paul. The guy is going to get murdered by this bishop, and he's down in development. And remember, opposite color bishops, the initiative is more important. I don't see him surviving this one. I really don't. Instead, queen c3, knight d6, and I'm not sure what's happening, but it still feels like you should have something for your troubles, and that knight d6 was just a strange move. I'm going to say sober minds would play d5 and let you have that pawn for the sake of the tempo, right? Like knight c6 and queen c7, and you had to go back somewhere, and then black can castle and have, I guess, a slightly better position. So knight d6, bishop f4. He's playing with this knight like a maniac. b3, knight a5. Terrible, right? Now, your move bishop d6 is, I think, well-intentioned. But the guy, of course, should play knight b7 now. And then interesting things might happen on knight b7. But let's look what he does. Bishop b7. And I want to say here, Paul, that you've got to be winning this one, right? This has got to be a winning position. So you played queen d3. But I think if you'd focused and said, look, I'm playing on the dark squares, I think the guy is not going to survive. Let's look at a couple moves here. There's several moves that are nice. Knight f5 is the move I want to play. But I'm not sure it's going to totally work because of queen f6. When I'm not 100% sure what's happening, though I really don't believe in the black position. For example, rook e1. Rook e1 scares me. And here's a nice one. If castle's long, we have knight e7, almost mate. And the guy, has a real problem with that stick on d6, right? So, in addition, though, to knight f5, you could do the more mundane-looking queen g3, and if, you're doing great. You have a grand initiative here. Queen d3. It's sad, but black admits his mistake. And here, bishop a3. GM cries a tempo fiend, so you'll have some ideas. That's absolutely true. Right. The reason now, Paul in New Jersey writes in, I didn't see knight f5 because I thought I would just lose the knight. Um, and the thing to realize is, once you have an incredible positional advantage like bishop d6, that's the time to start mating the guy. At least that's the thing your mind should instantly gravitate towards. And notice what happens here. It's worse than giving up than losing the knight, because now all of a sudden stuff is getting pushed back. And I really don't know. I think you're still potentially better after knight d6. And yes, I agree, it's very sad. Very sad to trade off this thing. But after the game, with knight g3, your knight's not going anywhere. And the guy's just, marching up the board. Let's say the g6 was a terrible move, right? Why, why is this happening? If he wants to block your bishop, he can do so with d4, right? So g6 is a very strange move. Queen d2. And you go in, but f5 is able now to shut your knight down. He shut your bishop down. Should you be thinking of things like c3? Absolutely. Let's see if we can do better after this terrible move, g6. We should say to ourselves, okay, yes, we're down a pawn and all that, but he has his own griefs. In particular, of course, that those delicious dark squares. It isn't immediately easy to see what you should do. One thing maybe we should say here is that it's difficult for black to move his pieces. And so, for example, if d4, we could really then think about c3. And as long as we can keep our bishop involved on b2, then we should say we have full compensation. So a move that probably should cross our mind is rook a d1. Right. Okay, guys, I'm gonna come back right away. All right, I'm back. My daughter was screaming. I said, no more screaming. That's what I said. So rook a d1 makes some good sense to me for a good positional way to approach this, where I feel like we still have full compensation in the position. Yeah, as things were, we got really thrown back now in this scenario, and black, I guess, is now just better. Yeah, this is not what we wanted, right? This is not what we wanted, Paul in New Jersey. This is not the way we wanted it to end. Oh no. Yeah, that's not what we wanted. I'll tell you what, let's do one fun thing before we leave this game. Let's go back to that critical position where it was bishop a3, or excuse me, he had just played knight b7, and by all rights the guy just deserves to lose. I guess there's multiple areas here where we could do it. Here, I wanted to play knight f5 here. Let's just give it a shot here. So knight f5, queen f6, rook fe1, and now here's a nice thing. Yeah, look, he's totally pinned down. If g6, what do we have? Bishop e5. That's very pleasant. That's a pure dark square murder. And does he, the question is really, like, can he move anywhere interesting? F4 is a thought. Okay. It's a thought, but, bear in mind, if we get in bishop c5 and knight d6, it really is going to be a hassle. So, queen f4. And you're right, we have the initiative. So, things like queen g6 aren't going to work out. Yeah, this is a beautiful position. I think he's murdered. Okay, good. Let's go on to our penultimate game, with DZ. And DZ wrote in earlier that he had to go, and he'll watch tomorrow evening, so we'll catch it then. Um, DZ plays a setup you don't see too often with this check Benoni. And to me, the check Benoni is interesting because there's a number of different ways the structure can arise. In particular, in the King's Indian, black sometimes can play c5 later. And that's what Fischer tried a bunch, where you're just trying to create an impregnable structure on the queen side where you might suffer a little bit, but where you eventually are going to want to attack on the king side after you've neutralized white's queen side assault. So, many different ways for white to play here. I would say this is very typical. And g3, good move. So, like we said before, it's about space, and this is definitely better for white, but think about it from his perspective. He's going to have to try to corral all of black's pieces and then slowly squeeze him. And when he's doing this, he has to play moves like g3 that eventually might prove weak, or to be a weakness. Okay, castles. King g2, I like that move. a6, a4, bishop d7, h3. We can argue about h3. Rook h1, bishop e3. White is a little bit losing his mind here, and I like knight h7. And I like the quote that DZ says here, that my friend Alex Yermolinsky, I guess maybe wrote in some book, says that the Benoni for black is for 3 pieces, not 4. It's a very simple thing. I've talked on the show before. Actually, it's not simple, but I just want to say, once you get it, it might feel simple. And that is that when you have less space, let's say in the King's India, the Benoni, sometimes the Benko, what you want to do is exchange a piece or two to loosen that tension. Right here you have pieces that are knocking over each other. For example, the piece on knight f6 was in the bishop on e7's way. The knight on g6 is, of course, dominated. If we could lift these pieces from the board, what we might find is white would be potentially overextended. That is, there'll be too much room for him to cover in his backcourt. I've never used the word backcourt in that way, but that makes sense. So, trying to exchange some pieces. Queen d2, f5, very nice, simple and strong. And white neglects the fact that after h4, black immediately and correctly, look at that, improves the knight on g6. And so this is a great example of what happens when the space goes bad, right? When the space turns around into a negative attribute where it's just, you have too many squares to cover. That's a very dangerous move, but it's already a difficult position for white. Knight g4, bishop f4, and knight hf6 has to be correct. I guess I'm a little bit, I was thinking about bishop f6, but this is just simpler. h5, no, you got to start bringing in your pieces, friend. You got to bring in your guys. Right, and there's a great variation here that black gives, and even though it's possible to miss this, when you get this particular kind of position where white has just neglected everything, you definitely should say to yourself, right, there should be a win. And let's look at what he gives here. King takes, check to the miserable king. Snip, beautiful. Check, while you're losing the piece. And of course, if gf4, which is, I guess, let's call that the main variation, the king is getting run out of town with moves like that. And it's all over. Okay. He writes 1-0 in the notes, but of course he means 0-1. All right, bishop d3, bishop f5. And black is still much better here. Why? Because his king is amazing. And the knight can do all kinds of great things here. Amazingly, white found this clever way to win the rook. Now, this position, I feel pretty good about saying that white needs to think about making a draw ASAP here. Maybe it's not so easy. Actually, I was thinking that he needed to play queen g6, so that if black went pawn hunting, there would be this drawing pattern back and forth. Maybe you could try king f8, but then again, yeah, let's go over here. And right, white shouldn't lose this thing. G4, on the other hand, that made me squirm a little bit. King f7 and queen f5, that seemed a really big risk. Really big risk. And right, don't don't do it. It's so scary to go into the queen ending, and white's seemingly like saying, well, let's, you know, force a draw, but oh my god, this is where things can really go wrong. And right, black was winning after. Now he wrote a5, but to me, let's just put in the simpler variation, king f4. So in addition to threatening this, we're threatening this, and so king f4, a5. And that, of course, relates to our endgame earlier on that we had with Dor at the very beginning of the show, where having that extra pawn move, right, is a big deal. That's a real Soviet thing, actually. You can sometimes notice in the early endgame they're conserving the pawn moves, and you don't really realize it. You know, something looks weird, and you're like, why are they doing that? It's like, oh, right. They're just in case they're holding their pawn moves for a future resource. And I would say this thing that happens here is an example of trust. Like black trusted white when he did this here. There was an example of trust actually in a GM game today with, I believe it was Karyakin against So, and yeah, it was just a pawn he could have taken. It was both sides played very quickly, automatically, and it was just like then ended up being a draw. With queen f6, you're actually pushing your luck a little bit too, right? Like a5. I mean, the where it gets pushing your luck is maybe king f4 is a little bit annoying, but okay. This all goes down, and things got weirder here. So, king f4, g6. This is a funny position. King e4, g5, king f3, and now he says king f7 to keep the opposition. Okay, let's pretend that that's true. King e3, king e7, king d3, king d7. But couldn't white now play king e4 and end the game? No, because we're saying king e4, king e7, and black still has this king f7 opposition. Okay, good. All right, so I guess this is what happens here. White, both sides are pushing their luck here, and he totally blew it here. Okay, white totally blew that endgame. I guess trying too hard to win. The funny thing here, what he's doing. Let's try it again. Here, 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 here. And it's right, it's really a problem because this b6 thing is ultimately going to be more scary for white than it is for black. After b4, though, b6, dude needs to take on c5, right? He needs to take on c5, right? Because this is we don't want that with the connected passer. I don't even know how to evaluate it yet without looking, but that's just something black doesn't want, and so I guess you're going to have to do that, and then we got our draw again. Okay, so white blundered, and thank you very much. Suk swung and out. Okay, one more game. We got the famous Ricker. I feel like Ricker's an example of somebody who's used this show and just his time to improve his chess. Um, you know, it's hard to improve when you're older. And Ricker's a little older than I am, and I know already at my age it's very difficult to improve. And I just want to say, Ricker has been trying, and definitely the quality of his games, especially the strategic thinking, has gotten much better. Where he's still running into trouble is what we'll see here, is missing a basic thing, and that's my problem too, as an older guy playing against the young freaks, right? That you can outplay them positionally, but if you miss one thing, that's over. Now white loses a tempo. White loses more time. Good move. White loses more time. And let me be critical of this move, d4. You're doing great here, and I think a6 would be a good move. The reason to be a little hesitant about d4 is, first of all, I think your position is better here. And after d4, I'm not so certain. The reason I'm not so sure is what you're doing is it looks like you're transposing into a King's Indian structure, now where white is playing a King's Indian. And let's just say takes. Now maybe you would want to take with a knight. Let me just show you this position. This position is dangerous for black with the pawns pointing this way, because white might be able to, at least you should try to develop an attack over here. And unlike the King's Indian where the bishop would be here, this bishop might be able to come and talk to the king. So right, that's why this is a little bit funky. All right, white, however, plays a3, kind of strange. e5, she should still take on d4. Bishop c4, in principle a good move, but watch what happens. Beautiful. Now, let's just say it, Ricker. I think you're strategically winning. And the only thing that she has to do now is to play either d3 now or after taking on d4. She does not, and you close it down. Beautiful. She is down 2 bishops. I don't know if I've ever seen it this bad. Yeah, so beautiful play. The game is over now. It is truly over, And that was all done with nice positional moves. So here, she's setting up a trap, really, of AB. Other than that, she's doing nothing. So your move was fine, but then you just had to be careful to go somewhere else. D7, for example. And she's really not doing anything. She's playing down 2 pieces. So bummer. And then the question arises, how are we still winning, maybe, because her position is so bad? I kind of like what you did. Good. Good. Now, I think you're still totally on top of it, even though you blundered the pawn. She's got her own problems. Snip, okay. Good. Beautiful. I actually admire that a lot, what you just did. That was really nice. Queen f1, being tricky. But notice, let me say something obvious there. Tactics in general aren't going to work when you have 2 pieces that aren't working, right? She is trying to do tricks, obviously, with the pin on the f-pawn, which you're in no hurry to move anyway, but also wants to do some kind of rook d3 stuff. And here you panic, and it really is a sad mistake. I guess the simple move would be to play h6, and there's no spot for the knight. And so, Ricker, don't be too upset about this. You will get your chance to get this kind of game again. And the art, let's say this for your stage of chess development right now, is to realize just that these people will consistently immolate their pieces and make pieces bad. It might not always be this dramatic, right? But notice, even after you dropped a pawn, you were still winning this position. I think h6, I think you're totally winning. But unfortunately now, you've set the beast free. And I guess now we have to say you're lost, right? Because her pieces are coming out, and she's up the exchange. She's going to win the pawn on d3. Oh man, that's a real bummer. Should she be thinking of playing c4 very soon? Yes, she should. But she's not. Check the miserable king, and then he resigned. Or went on time. Oh, that was a bummer, Ricker. That was a real bummer. So, yeah, I do want to say that I feel like you have improved quite a bit over this since we've been looking at your games. And even here, you have some practical chances of surviving this thing. She can get a draw if she wants with queen b3, king e1. She wanted more. Yeah. All right, everybody. I'm going to sign out. That was a great show. Again, I really appreciate that people are putting time into writing their moves down, and I just encourage people that, this process of writing the moves is very difficult, but it will ultimately reward you. At least that's what I believe. Okay, so we will meet up again at the end of this month. This is technically June's show, and so we'll meet again at the last Wednesday of July. All right, thank you so much. Uh, thank you for saying that, just kidding. All right, bye-bye.